As Miss Robin from the SAS supervised the work, she also approached Vase for a talk. As a mech designer, when do you think we will switch to the next generation? Taken aback by the question, Vase needed a moment to think through his answer. It won't happen too soon. We can milk our current generation for at least 10 years. We mech designers don't like to see the value of our work plummet before we extracted as much value out of it as possible. I'm sure the big manufacturers are colluding to keep this generation alive as long as possible. The security consultant nodded. That fits with our internal assessment. However, the new technologies employed by the advanced states have already leaked out a little bit. We do not believe the mech industry can stand in the way to progress very long. Why are you asking about this? Are you planning to upgrade your security hardware? For sure, and more besides that. You may not have heard about this seeing as you're young, but the mech and security markets are at their busiest just before the generational switch. That sounded strange to Vase. Why is that so? The new mechs aren't out yet. Why waste their money on goodies that will just turn last gen a few years later? A smirk appeared on Robin's narrow face. Oh, they aren't investing in new equipment, they are draining their existing stock as they wage wars and engage in high-risk ventures. Consider this. When was the last time the Vija Kingdom and the Bright Republic went to war? That was about 30 years ago. Right when? No. 30 years ago was roughly a decade before the switch to the current generation. The war between both nations were by all accounts brutal, though both sides tried to minimize battles near large population centers. Mech pilots, support troops and logistical personnel suffered the most casualties in that war. The worst thing about the war was that it ended inconclusively, just like all the previous wars between the two local rivals. A few planets changed hands and a couple of small cities got wiped off the map. The Bright Republic got a little worse off than the Vija Kingdom, but that didn't prevent the Republic from touting that they held the line against the foreign aggressors. As a friend in the industry, I advise you to keep your eyes peeled. The impending conflict might not escalate into a war between states, but you will see plenty of provocations and reprisals in the news. I'm sure the SAS will be exceptionally busy during the coming times, and so will you. If it comes to it, you might find yourself drafted. That sounded like his worst nightmare. If Vase got pulled away from his workshop, he could not generate any revenue or earn DP. While there were several provisions built into his contracts that allowed him to pause some aspects if the draft came for him, it still didn't leave him with much choice. If he came back years later with no money to invest in new equipment, he'd be stuck with obsolete assets that generated almost no value. Luckily, I've been awarded with a privileged status. The government shouldn't treat me too poorly. Robin looked at him with a skeptical eye. Don't think you can get a free pass with your award. On the contrary, the bureaucrats value privileged citizens even more. They get assigned to the highest priority missions, which can be good or bad for you. The pay and conditions you receive are generous, but the risks of getting caught under fire is very likely. Vase already gulped at those words. He wasn't cut out to fight. He had given up his dream of becoming a mech pilot long ago and had fully adjusted to a civilian mentality. Give him a gun and he'd be liable to shoot off his foot. He also realized he was out of touch with the core Larkinson family. He'd bet Melinda and the other serving pilots in the family already knew about this. Perhaps Melinda assumed he knew as well. The people of Saniel Ableen packed up their gear when they finished beefing up the security. Vase eagerly said goodbye to Robin and her people as they boarded their much emptier shuttles and flew back to Freslin. Though the people hadn't found anything egregiously wrong, it might happen any time in the future once he built up a name. Speaking of which, when will Marcella deliver the next order? In the weeks since he sold his first Mark Antony, he came to enjoy spending money. He wished the ex-pilot turned saleswoman would work a little faster in managing his sales. He didn't agree to give her a 20% commission for nothing. Does she even want the money? He declined to pick up his comm and call her personally. It indicated a lack of trust and an abundance of insecurity on his part. He'd wait another week. What should I do now? His disappointing result from his last design put him in a bad mood. As Vase realized the importance of maintaining a positive outlook when designing a mech, he needed to spend some time doing something else in order to regain his cheer. A mech designer is much like an artist in that aspect. He figured as he looked over Lucky as the cat still slept like a log. If we're not in the mood, we'll always be creating a work that misses the mark. Everyone considered mech design to be an intricate craft. Though the big transgalactic corporations turned the industry into a mass market, small independent designers still had a chance to compete with the help of the Mech Trade Association. Speaking of the MTA, I never really looked into them when I started my business. Perhaps they have some advice for me and my situation. As Vase had an abundance of free time, he skipped the terminal and instead hailed an air cab to Orinoco, the capital of Cloudy Curtain. The trip lasted a couple of hours due to the time it took to travel from one side of the planet to the other side. If Vase was in a hurry, he could pay for a trip on an entry-re-entry shuttle, but the expense wasn't worth it if it only shaved off an hour of travel time. Having visited the MTA before during his first certification, a receptionist greeted him without fanfare. "Mr. Larkinson, how may I help you? I've been in the business a few months, but I'm not entirely familiar with the norms and regulations surrounding mech design and production. Could you have someone guide me with the information that would be most useful to a beginner like me?" The receptionist pursed her lips. "That is a highly unusual request for our branch. The advisors in Bentheim are much more equipped to address your needs. Hang on for a moment, I'll check with my manager." After a short wait, the receptionist came back. "The administrative director would like to meet you in his office." He expressed some interest in Cloudy Curtain's first mech producer. Vase agreed to the request. He figured talking with someone who could call himself a director knew a thing or two about the traditions of the mech industry. "Am I meeting with Ryan Baldwin again?" No, Mr. Baldwin is the officer in charge of combat operations. He's the military leader of our branch." "Got it." Led by the receptionist, he entered the lift and rode it to the top of the office building. He exited to a clean and elegant-looking hall. The enormous room took up the entire top floor and was replete with windows and artwork. Every single nuance of design spoke of privilege and superiority. "Don't mind the decor." An elderly voice came from the luxurious chair at the other end of the giant office. "It sometimes pays to impress the locals, but I'm sure I don't need to awe you with our association's prestige." As Vase was not entirely a country bumpkin, he quickly shrugged off the oppressive atmosphere. He had seen much worse when he studied in Rittersburg. The capital planet of the Republic reeked of elitism. Compared to his experiences there, the MTA director's office clearly appeared sober and tasteful. Vase took a seat in the only available chair. He felt like a little schoolboy summoned in front of the principal for a lecturing. "So you are the young man who bravely started a mech business in Cloudy Curtain. Curious. Can I ask you why you founded your business here rather than in a more developed planet?" He took deep breath and spoke evenly. "The tax incentives are very attractive here. This is my home, and I'm familiar with the planet. Bentheim is a strange place that I've only stepped foot in once, so I was not inclined to join their crowded mech market. Besides, shipping between the two planets is fast and doesn't cost too much. I'm rather surprised more businesses haven't taken advantage of the friendly business climate here. It is because Cloudy Curtain is naked and vulnerable." The administrator spoke as he finally turned around to face Vase. His white-bearded visage gave the distinguished man an authoritative air. From his accent and appearance, he clearly came from a more advanced human state. The best security this dirtball of a planet can offer is a bunch of criminal mercenaries who are more proficient in drinking themselves to stupor than fending off a serious pirate attack. The director had a point. As the public port of the Republic, the Mech Corps regarded its security very highly. His cousin Melinda was just one in many thousands in the Planetary Guard. No troublemaker could kick up a storm and get away with it for long. As for Cloudy Curtain, perhaps a rogue mercenary gang could easily wipe out Freslin and have plenty of time to escape before the authorities got their asses in gear. "I haven't thought about that, sir," Vase plainly admitted, though he sounded a touch defiant. "I'm not moving my business, though. My mech boutique is tiny. It's not worth robbing." The older man smiled at him. "You have a backbone at least. That is good. Those who bend too easily in adversity do not make good entrepreneurs. Since you are worth my time, you can call me Justin Chandler. Leave out director or sir." "Yes, Mr. Chandler," Vase replied politely. He relished the chance to question a senior official of the MTA. "I have a couple of questions. Do you mind if I can ask them?" "Ask away. First, do you know any way of obtaining a production license cheaper than what's available on the open market?" Chandler shook his head. "There are ways, but none that apply to you. Through shortcuts, connections and improper methods, many mech designers have gotten their hands on these licenses. I believe that you yourself have received a couple of old production licenses as grants. Once or twice is okay. But don't base your business model around these easy licenses. A successful designer must stand on their own feet and create a completely original design to achieve a lasting presence in the market." The old man made sense, Vase thought. But what about component production licenses? They still cost hundreds of millions of credits. Is that much? I don't think so. I don't have insight in your accounting, but I am rather sure that this sum won't be a problem for you to acquire. You need to put in the hard work and keep up at it diligently. If you are a good designer, your earnings will reflect that. If you are at a point where you are constantly worrying about being able to pay for licenses and upgrades, then you are just not good enough. The advice sounded harsh, but true. If Vase was any random mech designer, he might have been cowed. With the assurance of the system, Vase knew he'd outgrow his novice mech designer status any day. He was very confident of his future. You're right. I shouldn't worry too much about it. I've only achieved one mech sale so far, but I expect that my sales will pick up. Perhaps I will make a couple of other variants that will enhance my earnings. As long as you are not at the end of your rope, you have many opportunities to achieve success. Vase turned to his next question. All of my resources come from the MTA internal market. I'm paying out of my nose for the raw materials required to produce a mech. I've been wondering if you can help me connect with a few suppliers to reduce my expenses. You will not attract any fixed suppliers at your scale. Chandler shook his head again. Unless you have formidable backing or an excellent referral, do not dream of negotiating better terms. The upstream industries think and operate on a scale unimaginable by your standards. A one-man startup like yours does not even qualify a second's worth of attention of their sales department. So it's impossible for me to get more favorable prices anywhere. That is not true. You can look closer and look at the local industries in Cloudy Curtain and the surrounding Star provinces. This region is poor and undeveloped, which means that most of the local mining and processing is done by small and medium enterprises, family businesses and cooperatives. The relative negotiating power between the two of you will be a lot less skewed. That could work out, though I won't be able to source the more exotic resources from local suppliers. I can send you a list of references to approach some of these suppliers. I'm sure my name will open some doors for you. The favor Director Chandler bestowed to him was substantial. Vase was deeply appreciative of the gesture. Thank you, Mr. Chandler. That is something I've always racked my brains about. Receiving your reference helps me avoid a lot of pitfalls. The two discussed a lot of other, minor topics. Vase and Chandler went over issues such as the production of munitions, bad idea, the cost of insurance, way too much, what to do when getting drafted, demand postponement of debt and any other time-sensitive issues, and more. The conversation was productive. While Chandler rarely gave out an answer that satisfied Vase, the fog in front of his mech designer career had parted a little. He no longer became mystified when faced with certain questions. At the end of the meeting, Chandler sent a couple of useful books to his mail. It pays to read up on the relevant laws. Always remember that mech designers invent killing machines, not glamorous toys. Although it does not look like it, we of the MTA take a very dim view to any mishandling of dangerous weapons. Vase gulped at that last warning. Understood. I will be sure to treat my physical products seriously. Oh, I'm not worried about you. Instead, I'd keep a closer eye on your friends and associates if I were you. Whether the advice was of any use in the future or not, Vase didn't know. He said goodbye to the insightful director and slowly left the opulent office. The director kept his sagely eyes on the young designer as he entered the lift and rode it back to the ground floor. Profligate. Lucky finally woke up the day after Vase visited the MTA. The cat appeared to slink in a satisfying manner, as if he ate the biggest fish in the universe. Vase gave his pet the stink eye. So, you got anything to say? Meow. The cat acted cute and brushed its smooth body against his legs. Vase let go of his irritation and just picked up the cat and hugged him in his arms. It was easy to forgive the loss as he never really owned the strange material in the box to start with. He suspected the advanced alloy may have been meant for Lucky in the first place. Do you feel the need to go to the litter box? Strangely enough, even after a couple of hours the cat never visited the toilet or his backyard. Vase picked up his cat again and inspected his body closely. Lucky still looked and weighed the same. He started to doubt whether anything really changed. Did the cat just eat a bunch of priceless alloys because it tasted good? He fed Lucky his usual meal of minerals and let it go out and play. Vase still had work to do. His harvest from the MTA mainly consisted of directions. He did not gain much knowledge, but he did gain avenues for further study, as well as a couple of books. He went over the 3 electronic books sent to his mail account. The 3 books all consisted of introductions to the laws concerning the production and use of mechs. The books appeared to be prepared by the MTA to give out to young mech pilots and mech designers, so the level of jargon and the depth of topics remained fairly shallow. It was the perfect set of books for Vase to familiarize himself with the laws around mechs beyond the brief lessons he received from his days in college. The first book revolved around the most important laws that govern the use of mechs in human space. It detailed the history just after the invention of mechs about 400 years ago, and explained how human space grew more chaotic with this advancement in warfare. The main point this chapter conveyed was that mechs made war easier. The ability of all human states to wage war increased substantially because mechs packed more firepower and mobility while requiring relatively less maintenance than other unit types such as planes, tanks, and infantry. It gave smaller nations a chance to stir up trouble against their larger neighbors, but it also allowed these behemoths to crush rebels thoroughly by flattening everything in their way with ease. War between the human states intensified, with conflicts happening up to 5 times more than before the invention of mechs. It led to a lot of suffering among the poor. Something needed to be changed. Naturally, as the book was published by the MTA, it predictably presented it as the savior of mankind. With hardly any explanation of how it came about, the MTA splashed onto the scene with powerful mechs and warships and suppressed the most gruesome conflicts with an even bloodier fist. Quickly, all the smaller human states got cowed while the larger nations negotiated treaties. The MTA firmly established itself as the arbiter of human conflict. The rest of the book introduced all the major laws the MTA enforced with vigor. From the prohibition on the use of starships in internal human conflict, to the abolishment of nuclear, biological and chemical weapons, pretty much all weapons capable of inflicting mass harm were limited to external defense against aliens. The only thing that really remained untouched were mechs. Vase found it peculiar why the MTA focused so much on promoting mechs and the technology behind it. They not only encouraged its use in wars, they also supported the industry behind it with licensing laws and certification services. The MTA single-handedly changed human civilization to worship mechs. For what? He asked, and was pretty sure he was not alone in asking this question. Spaceships remained the kings of power projection. What use was dominating the surface of a planet when even a middle-sized ship could bombard the hard-won location from above? The warships and the spacers serving on them were the real heroes of humanity. These invisible but vital servicemen defended the borders of human space against alien aggression every day. Yet hardly any day went past in the news without the mention of this mech or that mech. Many mech pilots stood out from the crowd and even became stars. As for warships, well, Vase could not recall a single name of a person who served on a spaceship. Even the other Larkinsons who all prided themselves as a martial family never got involved in the Navy. He eventually shrugged as he finished the book. I'm sure there's a story behind it all. The second book surprisingly dealt with the mech laws in the Greater Terran United Confederation. As a first-rate human superstate, it wielded a disproportionate amount of military power. On paper, it looked like an invincible giant that could treat all outside attacks as pinpricks. Reality proved many times that they often got the short end of the stick when battling against their eternal rivals. The new Rubarth Empire smashed the Confederation's nose time and time again. The simplest explanations to this occurrence always emphasize the Empire's centralization versus the Confederation's feudal-like power structure. The real answers involved more than merely governance. As the oldest human alliance, the Confederation always consisted of a gathering of smaller substates. Though they were capable of uniting somewhat against an external aggressor, they spent most of their time and energy overcoming their local rivals. In a way, what happened inside the Confederation's borders pretty much mirrored what was happening outside. The Terran Confederation's planets and star systems were all fairly old. Lots of people lived there from generation to generation. The cities there not only reached up to the top of the atmosphere, they also dug in many reaches deep into the ground. You could imagine any conflict that would break out in such a densely populated environment resulted in a devastating loss of life. As the Terrans tried and failed to curb the widespread use of mechs to settle grudges and the like, they finally came together and figured out a compromise. The entire way of waging internal war turned from a no-holds-barred total war into a more gentlemanly way of duels and limited engagements. In short, each star system designated one empty planet or sometimes moon as the system's control area. The entity that controlled the entire planet had legitimate authority over the entire star system. For example, the ancient entity that ruled over the birthplace of mankind fortified a planet called Pluto. They made an agreement with the entire Confederation that so long as they held this tiny planet, they were entitled to rule over Earth, Mars, Venus, Mercury and the other ancestral planets without any contention. They managed to do so since the founding of the treaty that set these rules. Naturally, not all of these so-called system rulers managed to withstand the test of time. Many weaker parties got kicked off from their designated defense planet, leading to a change in administration for those respective star systems. In practice, almost nothing changed for the commoners. Warfare got gentrified, and most of the damage and suffering got limited to the military and aristocratic classes. At the end of the read, Vase found the structure to be enlightening. Though the Terrans warped war beyond all recognition, the damage that resulted from any conflict was fairly minimal. It allowed the Terrans to preserve the majority of its strength while leaving some outlets for local rulers to vent their expansionist urges. It's good for the commoners, but I can't say it has done any good for their national culture. The image the people of other states had of the Terrans was that they were rich, lazy and decadent. They wasted so much wealth on senseless pastimes such as playing golf with asteroids or racing in flimsy shuttles and spitting distance to a sun. Vase closed the second book and turned to the final one. It did not discuss the major laws of the new Rubarth Empire or the Bright Republic, but instead was a more practical summary of what mech designers had to watch out for. He already knew most of the contents inside, such as not incorporating someone else's technology without procuring a license and such. Still, the book also explained some things Vase was not aware of its existence. For example, the laws concerning the hiring of personnel. Mech designers were entitled to certain privileges that made them kings in their own workshops. They could impose all kinds of restrictions to their personnel, especially their mech technicians. Strict rules existed against leaking proprietary know-how that formed the basis of a mech designer's competitive advantage. It came to the point where mech technicians and junior mech designers had to choose their employer carefully. A rotten boss could use all kinds of means to pin an employee with a crime. Vase realized he potentially avoided a calamity when he declined to work from the lower rungs of a larger mech corporation. If he got lucky, he could learn all kinds of tricks under a more experienced designer. But if his luck was lousy, his boss could treat him like a slave and get away with it. Even in the Bright Republic, which prided itself as a bastion of civilization in this barren star sector, the circumstances mech technicians had to face were very tough. Only the technicians from the mech corps and from the more generous mercenary corps enjoyed substantial rights. It's all about squeezing the maximum amount of value out of their employees. Only the most talented and the most connected get promoted. The rest have to toil for their entire lives in the same position. That was reality in a universe where automated production with bots and AIs took care of most of the heavy lifting. The MTA already did its best to encourage smaller artisan mech manufacturers to find their footing in this cutthroat industry. Vase finished the final book at the end of the day. Though his ability to design and fabricate a mech hadn't improved, his comprehension of the workings of the universe deepened. He learned more about the rationale behind some rules and was able to adjust his future direction in light of new information. He went to sleep and digested the knowledge. The next day, Vase received some good news. The second order for his Mark Antony finally arrived. Marcella contacted Vase directly for a talk. Your newest client is someone special. Special in what way? Marcella looked as if she was constipated. He's the grandson of the majority shareholder of the Ricklin Corporation. While he has more than enough money to spend around, he has posed quite a few demands. You will need to be flexible and do your best to accommodate his requests if you wish to keep him as a client. That sounded completely opposite to his first client, who had a practical use for his mech. The Ricklin Corporation was the Bright Republic's main manufacturer of low-end processor chips. Practically every cheap bot and household machine featured a chip from Ricklin. While the profit margins of these chips were minuscule, the sales volume was gigantic. The shareholders of the Ricklin Corporation practically sat on a gold mine that churned out billions of credits in dividend each year. As a descendant of such a rich family, this new client should have very peculiar requests. Fabricating a customized mech for a rich second-generation brat was not what Vase had in mind when he got into the mech business. Still, money was money and the customer was king. I understand. I suppose he wants to meet me. Right. You'll have to take a trip to Bentheim. I've taken care of all the scheduling and reservations. If you aren't occupied with anything, I'd like you to embark on the next inter-system shuttle. I can leave for Bentheim immediately. Vase quickly packed up a bunch of clothes and some other knickknacks. He called out Lucky and together they boarded a priority shuttle that swiftly brought them to the spaceport. As Marcella already booked him on a priority flight, Vase had no trouble getting on board a small, luxury transit shuttle. It was a medium-sized passenger vehicle that regularly shipped businessmen and well-off tourists from Cloudy Curtain to Bentheim and back. Though Vase looked a little out of place among the throng of middle-aged men and women, he casually leaned back against his comfortable seat and activated the projector in front of him to distract himself from the space flight. Lucky hung on his shoulder, sleeping yet again, the lazybones. He decided to dig up some news about his upcoming client and the Ricklin Corporation. The Ricklin Corporation listed in the top 50 of the Bright Republic Stock Exchange. Its profits were stable by maintaining an efficient production system that offered barely functional chips at bargain basement prices. Though other competitors offered much higher quality in their lineups, the Ricklin Corporation practically ruled the bottom segment of the market, which was also the biggest slice of the pie. With huge sales volume and an immense revenue, who cared if the profit margins were thin? Even the occasional stories of bad quality control and catastrophic failures in certain devices that used a Ricklin chip failed to stop the company's dominant market position in the Republic. The founders and largest shareholders of this company was the Ricklin family. Though they lent their name to the company they founded, they lost control of the board of directors when an incompetent family head squandered away a big portion of his family shares. It happened during the last war between the Bright Republic and the Vija Kingdom, so there was definitely a murky story behind it all. In the end, the Ricklin family diminished and pulled back. Despite this dark incident, the Ricklin family maintained its wealth through cunning investments. They poured most of their energy into improving their financial expertise. Now they maintain their position in Benthium's high society by relying on their profitable investment portfolio. That's rich people for you. It takes money to make money, and they have that in spades. Average people like me have to scrape for clients to earn a living. Vase looked into the family tree of the Ricklins and focused on the direct descendants. The oldest son stood out immediately. The gossip rags that plied the galactic net featured plenty of articles about the young man in question. Vincent Ricklin claims he has bedded 10 girls at a time. Is he a stud or a menace? Finney's drug-fueled binge LED to a 15 shuttle pileup, no word yet on casualties. The Ricklin Crown Prince chickened out of a mech duel. Disgraceful. Scammed. Vincent Ricklin misplaced 300 million credits after con artists convinced him to order a non-existent yacht. Certainly, the only person from the Ricklin family that took Marcella aback was Vincent Ricklin. No other scion of this rich and powerful family could be so extravagant in his spending. From the wild incidents the gossipmongers have publicized, Vase got the idea that working with his latest client might not be a cakewalk. I sure have my work cut out for me. He sighed, and mentally prepared to interact with a man who likely held no inhibitions at all. As Vase debarked from his shuttle with a curious Lucky in tow, his heart weighed down his mood. The articles he read about Vincent Ricklin all painted an ugly image of an irresponsible wastrel. As a serious mech designer, Vase preferred his mechs be used in the purpose they had been built. He was okay with them collecting dust in a warehouse or put on display in some kind of private garage, but to play around with them and take them too lightly was pushing it. No mech designer liked to earn a reputation for making flashy mechs that lack substance. Though it's not as if I have a choice. That someone like Vincent considered buying a mech from a newbie was miraculous. Vase should thank the heavens for giving him another opportunity to fabricate and sell his variant. Vase took a smaller shuttle to Marcella's brokerage. She owned a nice office in downtown Durham amid many other offices of major mech manufacturers and salesmen. Bollinger's Mechs. The giant name plastered on the small 5-story office made it clear that Marcella staked her claim on the entire building. Entering it, Vase was impressed by the interior. It managed to look upscale without trying too hard at it. Subtle touches such as abstract paintings and authentic leather seats gave the place a swanky casino-like look. Simply put, the decor encouraged spending. A receptionist at the lobby directed Vase to take a private lift. It seems like all bosses took the top floor, as Vase shot straight up to the 5th story. After exiting the lift, he navigated a small hall and had security bots scan his possessions. As Vase recently learned of the importance of security, he took the precautions in stride. He finally met Marcella in person again after entering past the double doors. Vase, good to see you again. She smiled at him from behind her desk. A pile of secure data slate sat in front of her messy desk. Take a seat. We need to talk. After Vase took his seat, he let out the thoughts bottling up in his mind. I thought you'd work hard to get a customer. I did not expect you to deliver me a human form bomb. There are many kinds of customers in this business. As long as they have the ability to pay, you'd better get used to serving their whims. The broker had a point, of course. Vase needed money and couldn't afford to be picky. So tell me about the client. I take it he's the playboy that's on the news all the time. She nodded at that. Vincent is a character. You shouldn't take everything that's on the news for granted. There's a lot going on in the Ricklin family, but they've done a good job suppressing leaks. In any case, you just need to know that while his allowance has been curbed, he won't have any problems paying for your mech. Naturally, that should be the case. Vase wasn't about to trade his mechs for favors instead of money. Do I need to pay attention to politics while I'm meeting with Vincent? That goes without saying. Now, don't get scared. I've been in this business for over 20 years and I'm still in one hide. As long as you keep your curiosity in check, there's nothing wrong with doing business in the big leagues. Marcella enumerated a couple of things to watch out for when talking to Vincent. Above all else, Vase had to avoid talking about the family succession. He particularly should avoid any mention of Vincent's siblings. The broker also mentioned a couple of major players who had hostile relations with the Ricklin family. Frankly, Vase found it ridiculous that he had to avoid so many topics. Still, he tried his best to remember all of the names. The last thing he wanted to do was to commit a faux pas and lose his precious commission. I've scheduled a meeting for you tomorrow morning. While it's not too late right now in Durham, I don't advise you to meet with Vincent at this hour. Nightclubs can have an unpredictable influence in your client's mood. That makes sense. I'm not in a hurry, so I can wait. Do you have a place to sleep? While Marcella offered him a hotel, Vase was fine with using her spare bedroom in the rear of her office floor to crash in. He played around with Lucky for an hour while thinking about the information he gathered so far. This commission reeked of trouble. This is probably like interacting with the little boss, only 10 times worse. In the perspective of some people, large rich families like the Ricklins were just thugs in a waistcoats. They usually relied on wealth and legitimate power to get their way, but weren't afraid to get their hands dirty if necessary. The next day, Vase took the shuttle alone to a private mansion where Vincent currently lived. He evidently trashed the previous 4 mansions he lived in after he got kicked out from the home of his parents. Fortunately, the structure was intact. The gates and fences looked menacing and high-tech, but once security cleared his entry, he encountered a majestic Terran-style mansion. White painted walls, imported tiles and brilliant glassworks dominated the decor. Everything about it spoke of sophistication. There was no way Vincent had any hand in its design. An old gentleman who served as Vincent's personal assistant led him to an indoor sports arena where Vincent was boxing against a bot. The artificial boxing bot fought back with brutal intensity. Even if its entire body was padded, the force of its steady strikes were so punishing that if Vase faced its punch, all of his teeth would be knocked out. Ha! Vincent took a glancing blow in exchange for delivering a solid smack against the bot's face. The robot's head shined yellow as it indicated the amount of damage it received. Again. As the man and the bot exchanged punches with each other, Vase already encountered his first unexpected surprise. The media often labeled Vincent as a lazy coward, but the effort he put up in his boxing was anything but cowardly. Still, Vase chalked up Vincent's fitness to his family's rich resources. Anyone could develop his body to peak performance with genetic therapy and lots of drugs. After Vincent finally called it quits, he threw away his boxing gear and disrobed right in front of Vase and the PA. Embarrassed, Vase turned around while a bot appeared from somewhere and blasted Vincent with cleaning gel. After a dozen seconds passed, the cleaning bot disappeared and a clothing bot took its place. Luxurious fabrics made out of highly resilient fiber spun themselves together under the highly advanced bot's direction until Vincent's clothes materialized in full. "Who's the nerd?" was the first thing that came out of the client's mouth. "Sir, this is the mech designer you have requested to build your latest mech." "Oh right, you brought me the spare." "Psha." Vincent spat a big glob of spit at the floor of the boxing ring. "That asshole Edwin thinks he's too hot to sell me his products, and that FC King bitch Patricia won't even pick up my calls. They are designer-sponsored and affiliated with much more formidable forces than ours. Mr. Larkinson here is the second-place winner of the Fusion Cup. His abilities may not be on par to theirs, but he should be sufficient for your wishes. Most importantly, he is an individual entrepreneur as is not beholden to any faction." Vincent stared at Vase as if he was a bug. "So, do you think you are good enough?" "That is your choice. The spec sheet of my product is available on the net. I'm sure you can see it's a mech that can keep up with others at its price point." Gutsy thing to say for a nerd. "Follow me." The assistant and Vase followed after Vincent as he stomped away from the sports hall and entered some kind of recreation room. Pool tables, sim pods and all manner of entertainment were strewn about with no rhyme or reason. The Ricklin scion headed towards a fully stocked bar and began to hand mix his own drinks. "I like to do this myself, you see. Letting the bots mix your drinks always gives you the exact same taste. Consistency is too boring. I like to seek out new thrills every day." Vase wondered if this had anything to do with the mech he was making for his client. "Now, I didn't ask to be born a potentate. It sure raised a lot of voices when I tested positive for the aptitude to pilot mechs. I've been puzzling about it for a while, and I recently decided to accept it and roll with it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Not really, but Vase wasn't about to admit that. Instead, he ventured out a guess. You seek something unconventional in a mech. Exactly. Heh, the mainstream mechs are so boring. As far as I'm concerned, the pilots who buy standard military mechs aren't cut out to be aces. You have to shed your fears and embrace your risks. That's also exactly why I went off the beaten path and found your mech. It's a Caesar Augustus but with crappy armor, that's so unique. Vase gently coughed in his hand. Mr. Ricklin, while I'm sure my product is a satisfactory mech, shouldn't someone as eminent as you afford a better variant? The playboy's face immediately lost its excitement and took an awkward expression. Vase realized he asked a question he shouldn't have. Fortunately, his personal assistant came to the rescue. We strictly controlling our expenses. Our allocated budget for a new mech does not allow for the procurement of a top-of-the-line mech. Your product satisfies my client's demands while remaining within his acceptable price range. Vase could read between the lines. It appeared Daddy or Granddaddy Ricklin had enough of Vincent's shenanigans and cut off his astronomical allowance. Vincent was probably squirming mentally at the thought of having to penny pinch like a regular human being. My design is already a finalized design. It is not easy to modify parts of it without making sure it won't adversely affect its performance. Vincent didn't appear pleased at those words, but Vase found it important to add the disclaimer. I don't care about minor setbacks. If I can't look cool while I'm piloting a mech, what's the point of their existence anyway? There's a lot of dorky-looking mechs out there. I'd rather die than be caught in something a bunch of virgins fantasized about in bed. At least your mech looks sufficiently cool. I like the whole ancient Roman theme. I just have a couple of suggestions. Vase groaned internally. It appeared the only reason why Vincent even considered buying his mech was because it looked cool. He guessed most of the so-called dorky-looking mechs were specialized models designed to excel in a specific area. Sure, they might look odd, but these models enjoyed plenty of sales as many pilots recognized their merits. Alright Vincent, let's hear it. I'll see if it's workable to add your ideas into a modified design. The socialite finished mixing something red and bubbly. He took a swig of his drink and yelled masculine ecstasy. Now that's more like it. Ahem, yeah, about the mech. First up, it needs a cape. A cape. FCK man, your mech already looks like a pimp, it just needs a cape to complete the ensemble. Trust me, it looks FCking great if your mech has a cape. It has to be red of course, or else it won't fit with the theme. Make it long and flowy, and don't think about using cheap fabric. If you need access to something fancy, I can refer you to a few friends I know. Vase didn't take the suggestion seriously, but he was forced to consider the practicalities of using a cape. Any normal fabric would tear easily if the mech mistakenly stepped on it. If Vase wanted to preserve the cape on the mech who wore it only performed light duties, then Vase had to pick something synthetic and a little stronger. I'll need to investigate what kind of specialized fabrics I can use to form the cape, so I might take you up on your offer. That's great. The cape's really my top priority here. Another thing I'd like to add is decorative lighting. Come on, all my sports cars turn into babe magnets as soon as I turn on the bling. Why no one ever thought to make a mech as flashy as possible is beyond me. Right, I need lots of lights running on the frame, and better add a couple of super duper powered searchlights to the head. There were lots of reasons why mech designers refused to incorporate decorative lighting in their designs. Not only did they add vulnerabilities to the armor and electrical system of a mech, they also pointed a giant hit me sign on their frames. It was apparent such arguments were lost to the client. I can figure something out. Give me a day to draft a bunch of sketches of possible design schemes. Right. You're okay for a nerd. Vincent said as he took yet another swig of his drink. Okay, the cape and the lights are just to pave the way. Now sit tight because I'm going to reveal my secret idea to you. If you know what's good for you, then keep it for yourself. Clear. Clear. Vincent grinned slyly at Vase. Since you're a mech designer, you must have heard how smart people say that mechs are built to resemble humans, right? Well, ever since I got roped into learning how to pilot one, I can see what these old people are saying. There's just one thing that's nagging me every time I step behind the cockpit. And that is. The mech pilot thrust out his hips and grabbed at his front end. This. My package. For once, Vase was speechless. He literally couldn't form any response to this insane idea. Now, I don't mean to get arrested for streaking with my mech. You should design some mech pants or whatever to keep it kid-friendly and all. Just make sure that when I'm out and about with my new mech, girls will be able to judge the goods, if you know what I mean. There was so many things wrong with this completely impractical demand. While Vincent kept espousing the benefits of boasting an enhanced mech, Vase turned his gaze towards the playboy's silent personal assistant. Vase managed to convey an expression that went along the lines of, "Are you kidding me?" To his credit, the old man was unflappable and never hinted at any disrespect for his young master. His eyes were sharp as a hawk and he seemed to suggest that Vase better take his master's request seriously. What Vase would rather do was to take the strongest drinks of Vincent's bar and gulp it all down. He could already foresee his reputation going down the drain if he continued to cooperate with Vincent. Vincent Ricklin unbelievably went on for about 10 minutes on the importance of manhood in mechs. He really believed almost all mechs were gender neutral. As a bona fide man, Vincent hated the thought of mentally castrating himself whenever he piloted a mech. Naturally, someone immersed in mechs such as Vase had no problem with the lack of gender indications. Mechs were only designed to emulate the human form in order to perform better as a war machine. Adding unnecessary extensions such as hair, skin or gender expressions did not add anything to a mech's battle performance. Frankly, only an extremely vain pilot who cared more for his looks than his battle record could demand something like this. Vase had the misfortune of making a mech for this kind of person. This is an extremely complicated addition. Let me think about it for a day or two. It's not easy to add mass in the front part of the waist. Actually, Vase wanted to ditch Vincent and go back to Marcella and demand they drop him as a client. Vinny was only up to his third request and already the envisioned mech turned impractical. His comm beeped with a priority message. Vase halted Vincent's rant with a raised palm. Sorry Vincent, I set my comm to notify me if there's something extremely urgent going on. Can I take this call? Sure. I'll just mix another drink. Vinny said casually as he turned his back and grabbed a couple of random bottles on the shelves. His mail did not receive a message from Marcella, Melinda or any other acquaintance. Instead, he received a plain text message from an account named The System. Mission. Gender change operation. Difficulty, C rank. Prerequisites, none. Description. A mech designer never cowers before a challenge. To be a successful designer is to be adventurous in testing new concepts. To complete this mission, you must satisfy your client's wishes and deliver a mech he can cherish as his personal war steed. Reward, random attribute candy worth 0.5 attribute points, 3,000 design points. The mech designer's eyes bulged when he read through the message. The capricious system proactively gave him another mission. While that might not always be bad due to the generous rewards it always offered, but this time it meant continuing to work with the Ricklin boy. He really needed the rewards. He'd regret it for the rest of his life if he passed them by in his haste to avoid a troublesome client. That 3,000 DP looked very tasty considering Vase would need to spend months just to accumulate that much. Vase slowly relaxed his body. He couldn't always run away from his customers no matter how unseemly they behaved. It was better to take on the challenge as best he could and treat it as another training exercise. He took a deep breath and faced Vincent again. Did you suggest this idea to any other mech designer? Puff. Vincent spat out disgruntledly, spilling out a few drops of alcohol in the process. I got a hold of Patricia Schneider. When I tried to impress her of my genius plan, she straight up shut her comm. Now, she won't even answer me back after a million calls. No wonder she rejected Vincent to the point of ignoring him. Besides the obvious, the mere suggestion that a mech designer adds some mass to a mech's front waist was an idiotic idea with no possible merit. Yet Faye started to consider it seriously. In fact, he changed his entire mindset and suppressed his skeptical viewpoint. He had to throw away pretty much all rational thoughts in order to entertain Vincent's outlandish ideas. While it's difficult to, enhance a mech's endowment, it would be easier if it's made of flexible material. Are you amenable to using fluids or a sponge-like material? It will be much easier to realize, and you will have the flexibility to vary the size while you're piloting your mech. FCK yes. That's a fantastic suggestion. Just don't make it too soft or fragile. The last thing I want to happen is letting my manhood deflate like a balloon. Alright, let's settle for these points. Vase hastily said, trying to push this little session to a close before Vincent mentioned something even more outlandish. After all, you don't want your customized mech to be too burdened with bling. Vinny blinked a little as he finished his latest drink. He burped loudly, allowing the raw alcoholic smell to waft over Vase. Whatever you say man. Adding all of what I've mentioned so far is pretty good enough. It'll surely pump up my personal mech up there at the top of the cool chart. The increasingly drunk playboy started to drift off as he grew increasingly drunk. Vase tried to disengage himself from the conversation several times, only to be pulled back as Vinny vented his frustrations about what he thought were uncool mechs. It took well over an hour before Vase hurriedly stepped out of Vincent's mansion. He heard more than enough opinions about how mechs should really look like according to the Ricklin Scion. At least he came out of the lengthy exchange with had a very good picture of Vincent's aesthetic tastes. He wished he could get on the next passenger shuttle back to Cloudy Curtain, but he reconsidered after a moment. If he wanted to complete the system's mission as best as possible, then it was crucial that he frequently consult with his client in order to avoid taking a wrong turn. Thus, he called up Marcella on his comm and asked her for a secure workplace where he could customize his design in peace. Absolute security doesn't exist, you know, but I can tell you that Durham's MTA branch rents out the most trustworthy design studios. It'll cost you a bit, but I'll call ahead and cover the cost for you as a favor. Just don't let Vincent down. It won't do your reputation any good if you dropped the ball with your second produced mech. I know. Despite Vincent's many eccentricities, I'm determined to make it work. Just make sure you charge him enough to make it worthwhile. Oh, don't worry about that, Vase. As long as he's happy, he'll bleed his credits until he's dry. They both chuckled at each other. Vase and Marcella were of one mind when it concerned earning as much credits as possible. Vase rerouted his shuttle to go on a straight path towards the MTA. It only took a couple of minutes to reach a sprawling complex an entire neighborhood wide. Security was extremely stringent here. The shuttle automatically descended and landed on a security pad. Bots led by a human inspector meticulously searched the shuttle and him for any dangers. It was a bit unpleasant, but necessary. You're clear to go. Vase resumed his trip as he looked around. This was his first time visiting the MTA main branch in the Bright Republic. The tiny outpost in Cloudy Curtain paled in comparison to the might and resources of the Bentheim branch. A great number of mech stables dotted the area. He imagined the MTA likely possessed the second most numerous mechs of any single power. Only the Republic's mech corps had stationed more mechs on this planet. When he finally reached the reception hall, he hopped out the shuttle and took a constantly curious Lucky with him into the structure. The entire building was built to impress. Built in a refracting glass and crystal style, it seemingly emanated that the MTA was an open place where knowledge was shared freely. However, some might interpret it more nefariously and suggest that no one could hide anything from their watchful eyes. In any case, besides the system, Vase had nothing to hide. Though the system still nested deep inside his comm, he wasn't too worried about keeping it a security. No casual security sweep could ever detect it and its remarkable properties. Ah, good evening, Mr. Larkinson. I see you are registered in Cloudy Curtain. How can I help? I'm here on business customizing a design for a client. I'd like to rent a secure design studio. I'm sure an associate of mine has already booked one for my use. Can you check it out? Ah, I see. Mrs. Bollinger has just registered a secure suite for you. The secretary swiped her hand, allowing a small green projection to emerge from the reception desk. Please follow the virtual guide to reach your assigned destination. Have a good evening. The ball slowly hovered away from the desk and out the hall. Vase followed leisurely after the green ball as it led deeper into the MTA periphery. The core areas were all closed to outsiders, but the outer areas of the complex was already sufficiently large that it took 15 minutes of walking before he reached his destination. He clearly reached a section specialized in providing services to mech designers. He saw plenty of interesting structures such as a library, a financial services consultancy, a junkyard filled with spare parts and more. The structure that held the design studios, on the other hand, looked fairly plain in comparison. After another security scan, Vase finally entered the enclosed hallways and entered his assigned studio. The electronically isolated room was fairly Spartan in appearance. Besides a seat, a desk and a terminal, it held little else. Vase could only barely spot the high-fidelity projectors in the walls and ceilings that allowed him to look at his designs in utmost detail. These systems were leagues ahead of the cheap consumer projectors in his own workshop. He turned on the terminal and swiped the design of the Mark Antony into its temporary storage. The professional projectors turned alive. A grand mech came into existence in the middle of the room. The resolution and fidelity of the projection astounded Vase. He even touched it experimentally, and could feel a soft resistance from his fingers. The degree of this simulation exceeded his expectations. A small smirk appeared on his lips. The MTA sure is extravagant in everything they do. Witnessing this small wonder helped Vase adjust his mood. After learning an important lesson from designing the speed demon, Vase knew he could not keep dwelling on what he couldn't do. Designing a mech was a labor of love. If he didn't love it as he built up its design, then it wouldn't be brought to life as a happy mech. He considered the design process to be akin to raising a child. The so-called child in this case was just a mech, but it was still somewhat capable of inheriting the mental disposition of the designer. If he hated the design process and constantly cursed in frustration, then his mech wouldn't have a good future, just like a child who grew up to be a troublemaker. Alright, enough adjusting. Let's get to work. Vase wanted to address the easiest points first, so he started with the cape. In essence, Vase could finish the job in a minute by just picking a random fabric, dye it red, and affix it onto a mech's shoulders. Merely, the cape was too fragile to last more than a few minutes of intensive mech piloting. As multi-ton monstrosities, mechs were often subjected to high-powered stresses. If the mech ever stepped on the fabric, it would tear apart as easily as a child ripping a piece of paper into half. It's got to be a short cape, with supports added to its length to make sure it doesn't get entangled in the mech's frame. By stiffening and straightening the cape's lining, he could prevent the fabric from flapping into anything dangerous. While it might make the adornment lose some of its organic liveliness, Vase thought it was a worthwhile sacrifice. I need to search for a suitable material. The terminal had a direct connection to the MTA's internal market. As Vase searched for advanced fabrics, he only received a couple of dozen results. Naturally, none of them were used in making stupid capes for mechs. Instead, they served other purposes such as enhancing a cockpit's upholstery. He straight up filtered out all the delicate materials from his search results. The list was left with more robust materials, all of which different from each other in many ways. Vase went over the products one by one, but found very little that satisfied his needs. Though some fabrics were designed to withstand rough use, that only applied to human use. Scale the forces applied to the materials up to a mech and they'd part as easy as a spider web. This is a fruitless search. No matter how strong these advanced fabrics are, they were never designed to handle the stresses from mechs. His search for a suitable material required a different approach. Instead of getting hooked on the traditional meaning of capes, he should instead consider whether Vincent even cared if his cape was made out of real fabric. A technically illiterate meathead like him won't even be able to tell the difference. With that in mind, he searched for a different kind of material. It had to somewhat resemble the thinness and malleability of a sheet of fabric, but it should be much more resilient. The list that the terminal spat out was a lot more extensive. From thin sheets of flexible armor to reinforced padding for delicate cabling, Vase found the selection to be a lot more extensive. He carefully refined his results and combed out the unacceptable choices. Thicker materials such as flexible armor did not flap at all when a wind blew through them. On the other hand, the thinnest materials could withstand some damage but not too much. It took Vase a bit of time to whittle down the extremes and end up with a small selection of products that possessed the right characteristics. Instead of making the choice on my own, I can send it to Vincent and have him take care of the procurement. After all, the products left on his screen all shared many similarities. Their toughness was derived out of a clever weaving of specialized synthetics and thinly threaded metals. A tough matrix support kept the fabric from getting torn too easily, though they did cut back on the material's fluidity. Nevertheless, they met almost all other requirements, so Vase hoped Vincent would find them acceptable. He composed a short message to Vincent and added the links to the materials for him to see. After sending off that mail, Vase turned to his next task. His face already took on an exasperated expression. Somehow, he had to turn his mech into a light show. My man Vase, I received your files. I can't say I'm entirely satisfied with your work. The cape doesn't have any frills and the surface lighting schemes don't seem impressive at all. The only thing I found cool is the red lights installed underneath the armor. Vase was afraid of that. Not satisfying his client meant his rewards for the mission could be reduced. I have made my design choices with resilience in mind. Excessive frills will be the first thing that gets lost when your mech receives damage. It's better to keep a clean appearance that looks great both when it's pristine and when it has survived a battle. The excuse was enough to cause Vincent to pause in his tirade. He frowned and thought over his words. All right, but I'm consulting a pro shuttle customizer artist for the lighting scheme. I still feel your designs are too basic. Why didn't I do that in the first place? You're not an artist. If you are unsatisfied with my designs, feel free to turn to someone else. Though the system wouldn't like it, Vase agreed with Vincent's choice. Just make sure the artist knows that mechs are machines that are meant to be put in the front lines. Yeah, whatever you say. As for getting permission and sourcing the materials, I'll let my assistant handle the details. That would be appreciated. Though he could purchase the extra materials himself, he'd be liable to get ripped off in the process. In any case, I'm still in the conceptual stage of working out a design to meet your third demand. I'm expecting to see your proposal by tomorrow. I need you to work on my new mech as fast as possible, within 2 weeks at least. That knocked Vase off course. This was the first time he heard about any deadline. Is it very urgent that I deliver your mech in that time? Yes, it's super urgent. I've already got a bet going on. I'm going to show that bastard that I'm not scared or anything. I'm not a coward. Yes, you're very brave. Vase said quickly, trying to avoid getting on the receiving end of a tirade. Vincent, I'll get it done today and have a potential design for you to peruse by tomorrow. You'd better. The signal cut off abruptly, causing Vase to sigh with relief. He had been a little negligent in his duties. He thought he had plenty of time to consider all of his options and refine Vincent's dream mech step by step. The sudden hard deadline of 2 weeks put a sudden stop to his leisurely vacation on Bentheim. He took Lucky with him and left the arena and its cheering fans behind. He hailed an aircar straight back to the MTA. After going through several security scans, he finally ended up at a design studio similar to the last one. He was ready to get back to work. A bulge, huh? Vase considered as he summoned the image of his mech, now with a cape and some rudimentary light system. In his eyes, the mech already looked pretty masculine in a knight in shiny armor kind of way. Adding an obvious bulge to the front waist would ruin the entire feel of the mech. Men who wore armor in those days never exposed their private parts to any danger. It's one of the most vulnerable weak points in a human body. Mechs were pretty much the same way. Its central position just on top of the mechanically hungry legs made it a prime position to place the engines. As such, the waist and lower torso portion of a mech possessed plenty of armor already. It would be highly challenging to elongate the front section without impacting a mech's maneuverability in some strange fashion. Unless he stuck something on it at a right angle? But then he'd ruin his reputation and get Vincent arrested for indecency. I shouldn't be the only person who is dealing with this problem. The mech is an imitation of the human form. Yet mech designers were content to wholly minimize any waist protrusions as much as possible in the name of efficiency. Perhaps Vincent had a point where he said that the lack of gender expression in a mech presented an obstacle to fully bonding with it in the process. If Vase simply put something subtle there, it might even improve the mech's X factor. But what if the pilot is of another gender? Vase could imagine a dissonance between the mech and the pilot should occur, but not too strong. Plenty of female and other gendered pilots pulled off fantastic performances in very masculine mechs. And while they are less common, his own feminine-looking Fantasia variant also showed that no male pilots ever performed much worse than the female pilots. Still, he couldn't help but feel that gender did matter. Maybe this was the great wall that held him back from scoring higher than an E in terms of X factor. The instance that he earned a C rating from the system must have been attributed to other factors. It might even be higher if Vase paid attention to his mech's gender in the first place. Is this the secret to obtaining a higher X factor? Vase asked himself, and with the knowledge he mastered so far, he guessed that it might very well be a viable direction to pursue. He then recalled some strange skills and sub-skills in the system's skill tree. They mostly pertained to replacing a mechanical mech's parts with biological equivalents. So instead of using artificial muscles made out of alloys and polymers, these researchers cultured living muscle tissue with the same shape and function. A mech is an imitation of the human body. There are some people out in the galaxy who believe in the phrase a bit more literal than others. Vase imagined he touched upon one of the great secrets of what humanity's elite are pursuing. He realized the mech designer system's unintentional reveal of what other researchers are pursuing in their dark and hidden laboratories were dangerous secrets. This was so far above his level that if he ever revealed any of his suspicions, that he might draw an entire battle fleet from some first-rate superstate upon his head. I better keep all of these thoughts locked up for the moment. He quickly concluded, and turned his attention back to the matter of portraying a certain piece of male anatomy. He referenced the galactic net again and took a look at how ancient pre-spaceflight civilizations dealt with the matter of armoring the crotch. A lot of ridicule-inducing images appeared. Some ancient armorers literally shaped a form-fitting codpiece that looked like they could snugly fit the member. In today's age, if Vase implemented such a thing onto his mech, he'd literally get hounded from his profession. The slightly larger and subtler codpieces were not much better. They still bulged out so obviously that they never failed to call an observer's gaze to the person's waist. Sure, they offered a lot of protection, but the way they drew the eye just caused them to look like flaunting peacocks. Then again, it's not like Vincent is any different. Still, Vase sought a more decent example. He found a couple of interesting images. Some armor designers neatly avoided this issue by adding a chainmail or plated skirt. While that would work brilliantly with certain mechs, he was sure to draw Vincent's ire. A man never wore skirts, after all, and his client wanted to flaunt his masculinity, not negate it entirely. He eventually spotted some codpieces that looked a bit more fitting for modern times. These codpieces skewed rounded shapes and instead used sharp angles in a combination of triangular and rectangular forms. These examples evoked the suggestion that they were there to do their job of protecting the crotch without attracting undue attention. It looked sharp, modern, and most importantly did not cross the line into indecency. Vase liked the concept very much that he immediately turned on the design studio's designer program and put his inspirations into form. He hit some snags along the way. The Mark Antony was a frame based on the heavily armored Caesar Augustus. Both mechs weighed at the top end of the medium weight class. As the legs and the waist were some of the most heavily armored portions of any mechs, this meant that it was highly unusual to add additional layers on top. Vase had to consider the range of motion of the legs. Extreme contortions could very well bump into the mech and crush any rigid obstacle in its way. He doubted Vincent wanted everyone to see him destroy his facsimile manhood while inside the cockpit. Shaping the codpiece in a triangular shape so that its bottom portion was minimized could only go so far. If I can't avoid any collisions, then it needs to have some give. He thought back to yesterday and recalled his conversation with Vincent. He casually mentioned using a sponge-like material to build this part with. Such a method could allow Vase to avoid the problem of leaving his mech open to destroying its own gender. He took an hour to design this simple part. He first took a resilient sponge-like composite from the market and shaped it in a roughly triangular form that protruded sufficiently from the lower waist. He undersized it in order to leave enough room for armored plates to cover up the soft and flexible composite. He didn't want to resort to a different material, so he chose to stick to the same HRF armor plating. After stepping back, he took in the entire projection of the mech. The Mark Antony still looked awe-inspiring and ready to fight. The triangular armored codpiece nonetheless attracted a substantial amount of attention, but its design was sufficiently different from the more obscene examples in history. It looked tasteful, even if Vase would never admit it. Still, he hoped Vincent accepted this addition. His Mark Antony variant somehow looked more complete with the codpiece. Well, Vase personally preferred it to be smaller and less attention-grabbing. Nevertheless, now that he considered the question whether it made any difference if mechs had genders, it looked more fitting. When Vase contacted Vincent in the morning, he showed the groggy-looking Scion the projection of his work. Even Vincent adopted a stumped expression. His jaw practically dropped as he admired the augmented form. "It's great. That's exactly what I was going for. It's a bit classier than I prefer, but absolutely nobody will ridicule me for hiding my package any longer." Vase questioned who exactly lacked the sense to criticize a mech's exclusion of unnecessary additions. Still, he kept his mouth shut, not willing to disparage any powerful heirs and step on Vincent's toes at the same time. After ranting about the genius of the codpiece for several minutes, Vincent finally gave Vase the green light. "I want you to go back to whatever dirtball you're based in and produce my mech according to this design. Make sure you coordinate with my assistant if you need anything extra. Don't call me back until you've finished the mech." His personal assistant took over the line. Vase asked a bit about the progress of procuring the materials for the cape, the lighting system and also the codpiece, and got a reassuring answer. "Our logistical department has fast-tracked deliveries to your workshop in Cloudy Curtain. They will arrive long before your flight back to your home planet." Vase then referred the personal assistant contact his broker to sign a contract for a commission. Marcella was much more capable of handling the sales portion of the negotiation. Once he received his advance payment, he could ship all the other materials he needed to his workshop. As Vase packed up his meager luggage and brought his cat back to the spaceport, he wondered how he should actually build his mech. Vincent's product had to be in his hands in around 13 days, which sounded a lot, but certification and shipping took a lot of time, and so did acclimatization. He couldn't expect Vincent to master his new mech in a day. The first time he fabricated the Mark Antony, he took over a week, and that was when he worked with maximum care. Now that he grew a little more familiar with the fabrication process, he could skip most of the excessive caution and work a little more briskly. Ideally, the fabrication shouldn't take longer than a week including the additional parts. Any longer and it calls into question why I even bother fabricating the mech personally in the first place. He could definitely imagine hiring a full-time fabricator to take care of his production, but now was not the time. He mentally apologized to Carlos for putting his job offer aside. Once he received more demand for his product, he could revisit this issue. By the time Vase exited the transit shuttle, he breathed in the fresh and moist air of his home planet. Benthai might have been a melting pot of trade and business, but it did not fare well hosting so many people in such a small planet. He led Lucky and his floating luggage carrier onto a nearby aircar and headed back to his home. His workshop already received its first deliveries of materials by the time he returned. The rest of the raw materials he needed to build a modified Mark Antony trickled in throughout the day. The new security system installed by SAS did their work and performed thorough scans of the arriving delivery shuttles and the containers they carried. Vase already summoned up the design in his systems designer program and optimized his first commercial design. He had advanced his skills a little bit since he first completed this design, so Vase took advantage of it to marginally increase his mech speed and armor specifications. It's only been a few weeks, but I've already advanced this much with my upgraded skills. The speed of his progress astounded him. Only true elites nurtured by more advanced states could improve this fast. With 3000 DP on the line, Vase treated this fabrication task with utmost importance. He could not fail his second production. Not only would it screw up the mission, it could also leave a bad track record on his thin record. A 50% chance of failing a delivery was not a good way to build his reputation. As his optimizations to the design was complete, Vase began the tedious task of starting his fabrication. First, he unpacked his raw materials and sorted them out. He checked each lot for their integrity and completeness. Fortunately, despite having bought these materials as surplus from the open market, they had all been delivered as promised. The MTA took a dim view on such manipulations, so they guaranteed all the trades happening under their watch. With such a formidable backing to rely on, Vase had high expectations for the deliveries he paid good money for. He spent up to 18 million credits to get them to his workshop. Everything is prepared. Now all I need is to get in the right mood. His modified variant was still expected to fulfill the same role. However, its changed appearance demanded a slightly different set of priorities. Vase had to add the goal of looking good to his list of things to focus on when building the mech. I know the design looks great. All I have to do now is to convert that virtual projection into a very real entity. While he set a firm deadline of 7 days, Vase did not rush his fabrication. He tediously drew out the most important task, which was fabricating all of the Mark Antony's parts without any errors. His familiarity with the process along with the consolidation of his fabrication skills allowed him to produce most parts without any issue. The HRF armor plating took the most time to come into being, though once he knew all the knacks, Vase encountered no risks in its formation. It had been designed with crude mass production in mind, as the armor was supposed to be a cheap and highly processed armor variant. To Vase, this was both an advantage and a disadvantage. The best part was that now that he knew how to form the trickier shapes, even brain-dead Vase could manage to produce a decent batch. However, Marlin Solutions, who originally developed this formula, had steered it towards making it as foolproof as possible, meaning that a lot of tedious steps in between had to be followed before the armor came into being. In essence, its production still took a whopping 2 days out of his schedule. The mace and shield were relatively simple designs, yet their large mass and volume meant that it took a pretty long time for his H3D printer to produce all of their bulk. As it took 2.5 days of fairly brisk production before he fabricated the rest of the components, Vase only had 3 days left for assembly. Luckily, the process of assembling a mech from its component parts was not a delicate process. Doing it right the first time laid a solid foundation for subsequent assembling runs, and as Vase only made minor changes to the design, he encountered very little issues. The only real problem he faced at this stage was that he always had too little room for cabling and other delicate components. The Mark Antony partially inherited the crowded interior from its base model, and Vase could not do much about it even as he already made some attempts at alleviating the issue. This portion is the riskiest step of the fabrication cycle. I can't rush it at all. If I stuff in the cables with too much force, I'm liable to break something. Thus, out of his expectation, Vase eventually completed the basic frame of the mech after 7.5 days. While the mech looked awfully complete, Vase still had to add in Vincent's bling. Luckily, all of the extras were nothing complicated. The lighting system was the most complicated system to install. Vase had not sealed his unfinished mech tight but left several holes in its plating. He could easily stuff in the internal lighting and emplace the wireless power transmitters in whatever nook and cranny that could fit such a small part. The exterior lighting posed less of a problem for him. These thin, flat pieces had already been fabricated by a skillful artist Vincent selected. Vase had to admit the sharp, angled design was leagues ahead of his own pathetic attempts. The artist even managed to form them in a way that complemented the codpiece. It reinforced the masculinity of the mech. After finishing the placement of the lights and attaching the crimson cape, Vase was left with the final piece. The codpiece lay on the ground, ready to be emplaced on his almost finished mech. He hesitated for a moment. This is a bit embarrassing. Looking at it, it feels like I'm transplanting someone else's private part. Still, in order to cap off his second ever fabrication, he had to complete this step. With a sigh, he ordered a robotic arm to grab hold of the codpiece and lift it up. The triangular decoration was not made out of exceptional materials, so the arm had no trouble lifting it up. When Vase made sure the alignment fit the design specifications, he pressed the final button and let the arm firmly attach the codpiece to its rightful place. Vase let out a deep breath. The mech was almost completely done. He let his scanner bot scour the mech for any hidden faults while he stepped on a hover bot and lifted himself up to the cockpit. He did not forget to finish the last step. He entered the cockpit and examined the small hole where Vase was about to place his next gem. What shall I choose? Though Vase had gathered a small collection of gems, none of them were noteworthy. Lucky still hadn't cracked out the exotic alloy he gulped out of the anonymous box that someone delivered to his address a while ago. Vase hoped that his gem cat would finish digesting the extraordinary materials and perhaps use it for this mech, but apparently he was too optimistic. He opened the pouch he placed all of the gems he picked up so far and randomly sought out the most sparkling piece. It turned out to be an exceptionally sparkling zircon gemstone. Zircon of minor resonance increases the tonal quality of a mech's weapon by 20% when installed. At first sight, Vase thought he hit jackpot. After gathering so many gems that only boosted an attribute by 1% or less, he suddenly dug out a gem that improved something by as much as a fifth. Then he read the description closer and got disappointed. Tonal quality. Are you kidding? What the gem basically did was make a mech's weapon impact sound more pleasing. Ask any mech pilot or designer if they cared how they sounded like. Pretty much none of them ever cared about it. Vase found the gem to be utterly useless other than looking pretty. Frankly, he was glad to get rid of it. Its appearance matched Vincent's vanity. After installing the gem in its slot, Vase stroked the console of the mech for a moment. Sometimes, he still dreamed of piloting a mech. Then he looked at the darkened cockpit and thought to himself that he built every part of it by himself. Naturally, he used a lot of machines to get it done, but in these days that practically meant handmade. I'm going to miss you. Vase left the cockpit of the mech and let the hoverbot take him down. Pride swelled within him as he satisfyingly contacted the MTA. He officially finished fabricating his second mech. Now he just had to certify the mech and let Marcella ship it back to Bentheim on a priority cargo shuttle. He opted to let the MTA personnel pick up the finished mech without him this time. Vase doubted that Gertrude, the technician in charge, appreciated his presence. She's going to be pissed again when I interrupt her schedule with another certification process. Still, Vase hoped his nascent contacts in the MTA could keep the curmudgeonly woman in check. With decent people such as Ryan Baldwin and Justin Chandler in charge of the Cloudy Curtain branch, Vase had no reason to doubt its integrity. By the way, that kind of begs the question why they are stationed in this backwater of a planet in the first place. They're way too good for their current posts. Could it be that Vase was too short-sighted? While the MTA didn't lack talents, he still felt as if Baldwin and Chandler's talents were wasted here. Hardly anything exciting went on in this quiet neighborhood. Perhaps they chose to be stationed here expressly for that reason. Or perhaps they were exiled. Vase shook his head and stopped cracking his head over this issue. As a large, powerful organization that spanned the galaxy, the MTA Palace intrigue made everything that took place in the halls of Rittersburg look like child's play. An outsider like him had no business speculating about what happened deep inside the MTA. While he waited for the certification to finish, Vase called Marcella. The hefty woman's face popped up from his wrist projector with a tired expression. Do you know how late it is back here in Durham? Sorry. I forgot to check the local time. No worries, I was about to wake up soon anyway. I take it you've completed your second mech. Yup, and it looks pretty good. The mech came off my assembler without a hitch, even with the extra parts. I've seen the designs. You didn't disappoint. I'll take care of the shipping and delivery on my end. You just make sure to get ready for your next job. You've already got another order lined up for me. Marcella shook his head. The deal is still in its early stages. I won't expect any progress on that end for a week. All I can tell you that it's an order for multiple mechs, up to 5 at most possibly. That was a very surprising piece of news. Vase still expected to meet single mech orders. Having someone buy 5 complete mechs was a very serious commitment to a newly introduced design. He calculated the sums quickly and figured out that the client could drop as much as 140 million credits in one go. That was a massive amount of money, and even if he left out most of that sum to cover his expenses and Marcella's commission, that still left him with 40 million credits of gross profits. 40 million credits, Vase already drooled about what he could do with such a sum. He could proactively produce and start to stockpile his mechs in advance. No longer did he have to wait for advance payments to start procuring the raw materials. With the need for an advance payment gone, his mech would be much more attractive for prospective customers to buy. Marcella could also show off the real mech instead of rely on spec sheets and projections. Don't celebrate too early, Vase. Not anyone is willing to spend so much on a last-gen advanced mech. Now that he thought about it, the money looked too good to be true. Spending a large amount of money in one go for a new design from a novice mech designer was crazy. Either the buyer was swimming in credits, or he added some extra demands. What's the catch, then? The buyer is an intermediary for another party. They want to conduct the trade without involving the MTA. That sounded like trouble. The two pieces of information were not too remarkable if they came alone, but combined and it practically screamed dirty dealings. Marcella should have known this from the start and reject the offer out of hand. While I might be a new designer, but I'm not desperate to the point of selling my mechs to pirates. Now hold on for a sec, Vase. Marcella held out her hand. It's actually not a pirate we're selling our mechs to. The intermediary is a familiar face around Bentheim. He's serving as an agent for some of the shadier mercenary corps, but he has a good reputation insofar that he doesn't deal with gangs with active bounties on their heads. That abated his indignation. Instead of selling his mechs to thieves, rapists and murderers, he did business with regional powerhouses like Walter's Whalers. Was that still okay? Perhaps not, but the air of legitimacy these groups often sported made it less objectionable for Vase to produce his mechs for them. Though Vase still had a question. If these groups aren't so bad, why don't they approach you directly? Intermediaries still serve their purposes? I have been talking to the representative on and off for the last week or so and he still hasn't leaked any details about his clients. The only thing you can do is to take a leap of faith. Vase imagined standing atop a tall skyscraper while spreading out his arms. He ran across the roof and jumped off the lip of the roof. Would he be able to land safely, or go all splat at the end of his fall? He resorted to his usual tactic when faced with a difficult issue. Let me think about it. Since the deal is nowhere near being closed, let me consider it for a while longer. Just make sure they aren't doing anything too shady. I do not want to get into trouble with the authorities. Me too. I can assure you that I do not relish in attracting the attention of the Mech Corps. I'll be sure to vet their conditions in detail. After talking about a few other minor issues, Vase hung up the call. Now all he needed to do was wait for his mech to be delivered to the Ricklin boy. He wondered whether his mech would see battle soon. Vase was quite worried at Vincent's potential performance. Someone who thought it was more important to look cool than to pilot the most effective mech was not a normal pilot. Who knew how diligently he learned how to fight with a mech? Like and subscribe.